As a kid, I loved making flip books. They were all I did in art class, whenever I had it. I worked really hard on one particular flip book. It was around 50 pages long, I guess. It had a simple stick figure walking into the page, waving at me, and then walking off. I would look at it at least a dozen times the day that I made it. Then it got boring. You know how kids are, not entertained by one thing for very long. I tossed it under my bed and never gave it a second thought. A few months later, I was cleaning up my room and swept the stack of paper out from under my bed. I couldn't quite remember what it was. I flipped through it once and got a sweet taste of nostalgia. I flipped through it once more and noticed the pages hadn't aged or gained any dirt at all. I flipped through a third time. The little stick man walked onto the page, waved at me, but didn't walk off. Instead, a second stick man joined him. It waltzed up, having either an item in its hand or a severely disfigured arm. It's not like anyone could tell the difference. The second stick man walked next to the first stick figure, stood there for just a moment, then whacked the poor fellow upside the head. The stick figure fell, and the second stick man swung his stick at the other man again, and again, and again, and again. What I assume was its blood ran from the stick figure's rather jagged body. It looked like nothing more than smeared pencil stains. The killer stickman proceeded to bend down and tear apart the first stickman's body, limb by thin limb. Once he was done, he bent each one into characters and letters. He set them upon the page to form a single word. He grabbed the base of his own round head and tore it off. Then he tore off his legs and then one of his arms. His zigzagged body parts formed themselves into a second word. What I read made me burn the flipbook. You're next. A young man and his new bride were honeymooning in Paris. They were having a wonderful time when she decided to see if he truly loved her. She asked him if he would love her even if she wasn't beautiful. He told her he would. So she slowly started removing her makeup and revealing a birthmark on her face. He really loved her, but he was shocked when he saw it. After seeing his expressions, he left and didn't return. With time, the man began to fear the worst and went to the police. The police thought it was most likely that the girl simply had second thoughts about the marriage, but they checked out anyway and found no evidence of foul play. As the weeks turned into months, the man finally gave up on finding his beautiful wife, and his life fell into shambles. He was so filled with grief. Unable to hold a job or go on with his life, he took to wandering the world looking for anything that might ease his pain. Years later, in Borneo, he came upon a freak show in an old shabby building. He went in on a whim. In the last filthy cage, he saw a twisted, scarred, and mutilated woman rocking back and forth and groaning strange, animal-like noises. He screamed as he recognized the birthmark on his wife's face. It's your first night in your new apartment. Your stuff is still in boxes. Your furniture, with the exception of the mattress on the floor, hasn't arrived yet. The utilities won't be turned on until the next day, so you're making do without. A flashlight and some candles will do for light until you go to sleep. Despite the creepy feeling of being in a dark, empty apartment all alone, you chalk it up to nervousness and try to get some sleep. A sound wakes you up. You lay there for a moment, waiting to decide if it was real or just your imagination being too loud. When the sound happens again, you check your cell for the time. 2 in the morning. You get up using your cell phone for light, and make your way toward the kitchen, the apparent source of the noises. At first, you think somebody has broken into your apartment, but you choke down your reaction as you stare at the figure. It's a middle-aged man, wearing what amounts to striped pajamas and standing in front of the microwave with his back to you. Although seemingly solid, you can also see through his body. You're paralyzed, mostly out of fear, but partly out of curiosity. "Hey," you finally manage to say. The man looks in your direction, turning slowly. Your eyes open wide as you realize the man has no lower jaw, letting his tongue hang free. Your vision loses focus and the apparition disappears. A sound wakes you up. It's your phone vibrating against the floor. It's morning, or at least light is coming through the window. You're back on your mattress, and the missed call is from your mother. You're confused about the night before and still shaking from the experience of what you saw. Was it a dream? Or did you really see a ghost?
Steam rising from the winding, labyrinthine concrete streets of New York City in the winter. The sky is deep, black, and endless, lined with the cold fire of dying stars. And there are a million other places Levi would rather be. Walking home from a late shift at a shitty job, hands jammed into his coat pockets, he craves a cigarette he can't afford to buy. His stomach grumbles in protest from a freezer-burnt TV dinner at lunch. He hasn't eaten since then. Yeah, he was angry and miserable with his life and wished he was someone else who lived 1,000 miles away. But he was Levi Reed of New York City. He who spent years of his life in college, only to discover he was not able to find a job in the field he studied. He just resigned to working a minimum wage job with terrible hours. He wanted out. He just didn't know how to go about doing it. Levi mulled over this as he trudged through the park at night. Hobos lay on benches in freezing weather, with haunted eyes following him silently as he walked past. He did not avert his gaze. A few moments later, and further down the path, he glanced up, feeling uneasy. The street lamps up ahead would flicker for several seconds before dying out entirely. This continued, one by one, until the lamp nearest to him went out. This was accompanied by a distant thump of hooves beating against pavement. Confused, Levi came to a halt. He strained to listen, not entirely convinced the sound was real and not just a product of his own mind. The nearer the hooves beating drew, the more the rest of the world seemed to fade out and away, as if somebody was turning a dial. His own heartbeat, thudding in his ears, seemed to sync with the outside source, and then an eerie silence. Over the crest of the hill came a horse and a rider. It was a great, powerful stallion with rippling muscles and a coat of fur as white as death, eyes burning with all the cold fury of hell. Atop its back was a constantly shifting enigma, a large blur. Levi could not comprehend those morphing colors, the likes of which he had never seen. And then it spoke.
"Do you wish to die?"
Levi could not think clearly. His mind ran screaming in 1,000 different directions, threatening to break apart entirely. All he could manage was, "Who are you?" The rider's steed snorted, steam billowing from its flared nostrils. It pawed at the ground impatiently with one enormous hoof. The rider's ever-changing features seemed to settle somewhat into that of a broad, vaguely humanoid shape. Its eyes remained blurry, rapidly shifting, looking straight through him, to his soul.
"Ask not who I am," But what?
Without warning, the rider reached out and placed his hand to Levi's forehead. From its fingertips and into his brain flowed eternity, chaos, destruction, life, death, rebirth, kings and men, war and famine. The secrets of the universe, everything. Levi dropped to his knees, wailing in agony. The rider observed him quietly, watching with indifference as Levi doubled over. His whole body trembled and shook as he collapsed, heaving once. Blood spurted from his mouth, staining snow the color of brilliant crimson beneath him. For a long moment, he was still. At the sound of the rider's voice, his eyes rolled in that direction, and he remained silent but willing, a soldier standing attention to his commander.
Go forth, mortal, and tell your fellow man this world will end in 49 days.
Levi's eyes rolled into his skull, replaying the terrible secrets he had seen again and again and again. Having been a witness to these horrors, he found he was no longer quite the same, no longer quite human. The rider lifted the reins to the stallion, snapping them once, those cold hellfire's eyes never leaving Levi's own.
For I am death, and you shall follow me.
In a blazing flash of white, the rider and the horse were gone. Levi lay there for what felt like a very long time, hearing those words only. Then he slowly rose to his feet among the blossom of red in the frost and snow. The sharp breath of winter brushed past, but he didn't mind. There were greater concerns to be had now. The world was going to end. Levi was the messenger. They say that madness runs in my family, but I would disagree. I would more likely say that my family, in its history, has been plagued by a series of grievously unfortunate events that took their tolls on the minds of my great-grandfather, my grandmother, and most recently, my father. It simply wasn't within our control. For example, Great-Grandpa Stephen wasn't always the sheltered recluse of a man that my mother used to tell me of. He was once a great role model and a brilliant biologist who womanized in his youth with his countless exploits of trips to the Amazon jungles and Middle Eastern deserts that had amassed him a great wealth of exotic pets within his estate. But after his wife died, he became attached to the bottle and would lock himself up days on end, shouting to seemingly no one in his atrium full of insects and snakes. On the rare occasions she saw him, said my mother with a weak sigh, he rarely spoke a coherent word. He simply gibbered at his glass tanks, as if the creatures crawling within understood his every word. They say it was due to a drunken accident that he was found in his mansion, dead, lying in a glass tank, along with 5 fat-tailed scorpions. And then there was dear old Grandma Susan. I still remember when she would show off her marvelous sketches of the forest. I still remember when she was a sweet old lady that would bake us cinnamon and raisin cookies rich with brown sugar and straight from the oven so that they were still moist and hot. Of course, this was before one day she tried to feed my brother and me cookies with a fat, squirming cockroach baked into each one. I remember her protesting as my mother pulled us out of the kitchen.
They're full of goodness and sweet dreams and chittin'.
We never really saw her again after that. No more trips to Grandma's, no more cookies, no more cockroaches. I don't know what it was with the cockroaches. She started drawing those everywhere. I looked through her notebook during the funeral at her house, after she was found beside a bottle of powerful roach killer. They were full of elaborate drawings of cockroaches and peculiar writings about swarms and buzzing inner ears. I miss Grandma, but I suppose everyone goes senile sooner or later. It couldn't be helped. She did look so calm in the casket, so dignified. She would have been proud to go that way. But my father, well, I'll admit, I'm not too sure about my father. He was always quiet, rarely reprimanding, almost never saying a word. I don't know why my mother married him. I don't know why they bothered having my brother and me, because they so rarely even acknowledged that we existed. I never knew quite what to think of him. I loved him, I suppose. Despite everything he's done, I love him. I loved him when he put me to sleep as a child, when he gave me a rare smile after doing well in school, and when I came home to find my mother and brother strangled and collapsed in a pile in the backyard. My father was nearby, playing with an anthill, watching the creatures run the length of his long, rough fingers. It's sad indeed, our family history. There's very little pride in holes where insects crawl, because here, family and fate means nothing, as all that matters is feeding the hive, feeding the king. But I suppose our unfortunate incidents were inevitable acts of survival of the fittest. Our great-grandfather was a mighty man, but even cockroaches can be quashed, and as greatly as they may try, those little ants cannot hope to escape the slaughter of the beautiful, invincible scarab. The claws and shell and wings and mandibles give me shivers every time I caress them. And that infinitesimal moment of tension where their carapace bends before it shatters beneath the tooth is exhilarating. Even in the soft cage, they still come to me in the silence to feed them, to give me a blessing from the king, with feelers and legs and hooks. They say that madness runs in my family, but I would disagree. The scarab whispered otherwise as it burrowed into my brain.
The weak minds of men can rarely resist intrusions by dark forces. One day soon, you will likely succumb as well.